Where there's doubt, faith. Where there's despair, hope. Where there's darkness, light. And where there's sadness, joy. Say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The forward-way test of the things we think, say, and do. First,
Is fair to all concerned. Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you, Justin. President, will you present our sergeant?
Good morning. This morning we have 44 members in attendance. Today we have a guest, Rotarian from Summit Rotary, Ira Ross. Yay, yay. And we have 4 visitors here today. So Jeff Tillman has a guest. Would you like to introduce?
Mary Jean, you want to stand up and introduce yourself?
Good morning. I'm Mary Jean Nelson with Greensboro Imaging and the Breast Center of Greensboro Imaging, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning.
Rob Midget has 2 guests with him.
I do. I'd like to introduce Andy Crutchfield. Andy's been a long-time friend. He owns and operates Crutchfield Advisors, which is he's a certified financial planner, and he does so with his daughter, and she's a Rotarian. Andy is a former Kiwani.
I'm slower.
He's
at the right place now.
My other guest is Ron Flack. Ron is he's CEO and president of Olive Behavioral Group, and they work with opioid addiction. They're a treatment program facility. Got 9 locations across the U.S. Is that right?
Wow.
And luckily I met Ron through other.
And then Buster Lewis has a guest.
Oh, David. Stand up, David. Tell us about yourself. The honey man.
All right. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Christy. David, good to see you. Mary Jean, nice to have you with us this morning.
Thank you, Chip.
Andy, Ron, nice to have you guys visiting. I thought I saw Charlotte here too. Yeah. Charlotte, good to see you this week. Well, I want to know, let's see, Rick, are you ready to do birthdays and anniversaries?
I am.
Let's do it.
All right. All right, good morning. We've got birthday and a club anniversary and a few wedding anniversaries celebrated this week. First, we're going to start off with Mr. Tom Phoenix, who has a birthday on the 20th. Tom here? I thought I had time. I knew he wasn't here. I was just throwing it out for your information. All right, and I know Jim Kennedy's here. Hi. President of County 4. Jim's got a club anniversary, and it was actually on the 19th, and it was for how many?
How old is the club? 28.
28. So, yeah, one of our founding members. Way to go, Jim. Thank you for doing that. And we've got some wedding anniversaries this week. First, let's see, Mr. Chris Neal. Yeah. When?
May 21st.
Yeah, and how many?
2011, 8 years.
There you go. All right, my man.
It's my password to everything.
Everybody write that. He just changed his password from 1, 2, 3, 4 and went to a birthday. Great. All right. Great security. All right. Cause you get up with me. Judy Brumley. And I think you had a wedding anniversary also on yesterday, and was it for 8 years? All right, way to go, Judy. Way to go. And Cooper Trotter. There we go. And I think you have an anniversary today. Happy birthday.
32.
Yes, sir. All right. Congratulations. President, that wraps us up.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. I'm going to call on Chris Justice to lead things. So, Chris, I want to find out how the go-kart racing went. And just a little background, you know,
back in the beginning of our Rotary year, we had a program on the CART Fund, which is coins and checks and cash for Alzheimer's research. And our club was one of the top donors for the district in that area, and they qualified us to send a racer to do some go-kart racing. And Chris was my proxy for the day, and I want to find out how it went.
Well, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is I have this great trophy. The bad news is it was from the scrub heat in the race, not the top heat.
You can put it on your trophy shelf.
Yeah, I had some serious issues during qualifying, but I redeemed myself on the real race. So it was a lot of fun. But the important part of it, the purpose of the event, was to get the top clubs together that have championed the CART Fund, and that is the fund for Alzheimer's research. That actually originated in our zone, and Gary Everhart. He's in a Greensboro area club. He's really the coordinator for it, and they at a regional meeting for CART. They just handed over $1 million check for Alzheimer's research, and that really is that's all from Rotary. 100% of the donations go to Rotary. The event in Huntersville this last week it was all donated and paid for by sponsors. So none of the CART Fund went to that mess, but it was a lot of fun. I was incredibly sore the next day. That takes a toll on you. 11 turns. If y'all haven't been out there, it's a really, really cool event. So and a really cool place to just go. So if you have a chance going out there.
So we didn't cover it, but we don't owe the Motorplex anything for damages.
No.
Okay.
Not that I know of.
Oh, good. Alzheimer's research is something I think that we're going to see Rotary do more and more with in the future, and it's an important topic and an important mission, the curing of Alzheimer's. Matthew, do you want to give us a quick update?
I do. Good morning, everybody. Just want to put on the calendar, sent out the sign-up genius last week, June 1st, 9 o'clock, Camp Carefree, 127 Carefree Lane. I've written it up top now. It's memorized. So I know at least we're doing some ceiling tiles, and I will come up with more items, and it would be wonderful if more than one person would join me. So far, only one person is joining me. I appreciate it.
You said ceiling tiles. They did that before.
Who's the early signer?
It'll be Danny Bartley.
Danny, thank you. We need some help with this. Some people go with Danny so he's not solo on that. Oh, yeah. June 18th, the district officer installation banquet in Alamance at the Alamance Country Club. June 26th is a really important day to me. Changing of the guard, we're going to get some information out on menu pricing and sign up genius pretty soon, I think, on that. So mark your calendar, Wednesday the 26th. That's almost all the business I have this morning, but there's one more thing. Auburn, can I get you to come up front? This is a special day. We love doing this. Come on up front. Promotion, that's right, it is promotion day. This is the day that we are going to trade the red badge for the white badge as a reminder.
I can't take
We will do this another day. Just to try to recover and get back on my feet. We exchanged the red badge for the white badge when a new member has completed a series of items, experiences to get them more familiar with the club. Okay, Buster, bail me out.
You always say, I was just going.
Was the first year I was eligible to play in the senior division of the President's Cup at our club, the big member tournament, and we shot a gross 135.
Is that good?
Yeah, shot 74-72. Yeah, so we won first. So
all right.
It was great. First. Yep, and had a big time. I got the big Christmas cup. So it's good to be an old guy. It's good to be an old guy.
Who was on your team?
Jim Morgan was my partner.
Get him, kid.
Well, as I sent out an email this week, I'm headed up to Virginia International Raceway on Monday to get on the track for charity laps, and no one responded. I invited anybody to sit in the right-hand seat with me. I've never wrecked yet. So, if you want to come along and get on the track and get on the track at some speed, maybe up to 100 miles an hour, give me a call.
Bring your own bicycle helmet.
And if you want something really exciting, you can ride around with me for a day.
That's around town, right?
I'm afraid I have to give a happy dollar that Chip and the board haven't fired me yet. My apologies. Yeah, for some reason, I wanted to call you Auburn forever.
You did it right. You just.
What's your name?
All right, two happy dollars. This is my first time ever doing two. The first one, my daughter, I'm taking her this morning at 10:30. Everybody say a quick prayer. She's taking her driver's license test, the driving part. So at 10:30, just stop what you're doing, say, just be with Emma Frida and get her through this. The second happy dollar, Ralph, would you stand up? I want to give a shout out. Ralph made the state cup in doubles. What? Tell us about the doubles tennis.
It's men's over 40 tennis. It's
Way to go, Ralph.
I'm trying to process that.
You might tell us.
You have to announce the car.
She drives a Jeep, a little silver Jeep Liberty.
Okay.
It's gonna be off market.
Well, I got two. I want to thank the house for letting me do apartment in the new house we're moving into. And then Guy Rabondo, I met with him last week, and we were going to set up a time to meet this week. And I said, what time? He said 6:15 before the meeting. So I met Guy this morning at 6:15 at his house. Thank you, Guy.
Ralph didn't tell you.
All right, so I have a proud pop-up moment with my daughter Kaylee. She's been in a club called the Gillespie Park Pals, which is a club out of Northwest High School. Gillespie Park Elementary is one of the underperforming schools in Guilford County, and this is a project that something that she has done completely on her own. They basically provide childcare so parents can come to school and be involved in PTA and projects. They engaged in a book drive, had a bunch of fun activity nights, and she came in with a huge smile on her face this week and said she's going to be president of that club next year. So,
This happy dollar is sort of for last week, and for Gail's cancer. So when I watched the meeting video, I saw Gail bragging on my daughter playing soccer last week in Charlotte. That's for the bragging.
Come on. Had a unique experience last week. There was a person in our house doing an appraisal, and while he was at the house, he said, in the middle of the thing, he said, "Are you Dr. Sears' son?" I said, "No, I'm Dr. Sears." He said, "Well, you and Dr. Poindexter treated me in early 1970s. For those of y'all, I came here in 1970s, North Dungeon. So you treated in the early 70s, so anyhow, it made my day.
About 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon, I hear this knock at the front door. It's David Graves with 4 pounds of honey. I want to see a show of hands of everybody who else got a delivery. Wow. Thank those bees for us.
Drinks are on David. Well, Grandpappy Lewis wanted me to tell y'all today that he was sorry your dragon show ended so stupid. It takes a lot. You kind of look around the crowd and see who the old people are.
Never seen that. I just watched the third episode. You started watching that here.
I didn't get it. I didn't watch it.
Good morning, everybody. You know, a show is midway. Good morning, everybody. Chip, can you guess what our program's on today?
The history and treatment of polio.
That's awesome.
In case you guys don't know, Rotary has been integrally involved with the eradication of polio for a long time now. It's been one of our central goals. This morning we're going to hear a whole lot about history of polio in Greensboro, North Carolina. Bill Tankersley is our speaker, and he's actually a very decorated speaker, not just for this talk, but in his previous professions. Bill was born in Greensboro, I believe a native, in '48. Diagnosed with polio at the age of 5, was treated in the hospital in 10 months, and then went back to active life. Went to Furman University, met his wife Melissa there, and I got a CPA. Worked for the IRS for a while, then went back to school at the University of North Carolina Law School, graduated with honors, was on law review, the whole bit. Went to work for Carruthers and Roth here in Greensboro, and then was diagnosed in the 90s with post-polio syndrome, or 96. He is still basically on call, I believe, with Carruthers and Roth, and they need an expert.
It's called up counsel, which means they can get your advice, but they don't have to pay you.
Three children, 2 grandchildren, still living in Greensboro. Please welcome Bill Tanker.
I want to thank y'all, in particular Rotary, for supporting the eradication of polio. That obviously means a great deal to me personally. But I am a polio survivor, which means that it didn't kill me. I came down with polio in July of 1953, 9 days after my 5th birthday. Now what's interesting is I was not the first one in my family with polio. My sister several weeks before, who was three years and about 8 months, was diagnosed with polio, Adele. But they were going, and the damage polio did to her was injured her right arm and right leg. It was not too severe, but it was enough that she was going to need physical therapy. And they were apparently going to do that on an outpatient basis. They did not hospitalize her. When I was hit by a Mack truck. I had involvement in my neck, back, shoulders, both arms, both legs, hips, and even my toes. And they rushed me out to the Central Carolina Convalescent Hospital, which was a polio hospital that was built in 1948 at the corner of Bessemer Avenue and Huffmine Mill Road. In fact, if you're curious, part of the building is still there, not the entire building, not the entire hospital, but a small portion of it is still there, sitting there and being used. The land was owned by Guilford County. But let me back up a little bit. The triad was polio was very well known here. It had been around for a long time. There were multiple cases in and around the area, year in and year out. And every once in a while there'd be a flare-up. Nobody knew why. But in 1935, they had 29 cases of what I call paralytic polio. That's not a medical term because I'm not a doctor. But it's what I call paralytic polio, and I'll explain to you a little bit what that means. In 1944, there were 56 cases of paralytic polio in Guilford County. Now, in 1944, that was the year that Hickory had a major epidemic. It was so bad up there that they actually ended up building a rehabilitation hospital in Hickory. In fact, a lot of the people in our area that came down with polio went up to that facility because there was nothing here. But we had such a demand for beds here. Because what they do with polio, see, there was no cure for polio. They didn't treat it. They weren't giving anybody any pills. What they were trying to do is rehabilitate the damage that had been done by the polio. The polio was gone. These children did not have polio anymore. But they had extensive damage done to their neuromuscular system. And the only way to fix that was through intense physical therapy and heat treatments, which meant that was an everyday process, which meant there's the local hospital, which at that point was St. Leo's. Anybody here remember St. Leo's?
I was born there.
Yeah, okay. It was a tiny hospital, and they couldn't handle the treatment regimen that these children required. So the county finally decided to do something about it, and then they opened a rehabilitation hospital to treat this damage in 1946, and it was located on the Army Overseas Replacement Depot. We used to have a 600-acre Army base here in Greensboro, out in Bessemer Avenue. The base closed at the end of World War II, and the county took over the recreational building. Let's see if I can get this thing to work here. Yeah, there we go. That's a picture of me. I was the poster child for the March of Dimes in January of 1954. That's me in my hospital bed. You'll notice the straps. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. That was not a position I wanted to be. I did not apply for being the poster child. But if you're going to be on the front page of the Greensboro Daily News, that beats being in handcuffs on the front page. Now this is the OR. I call it the ORD hospital. It was located at the Army Overseas Replacement Depot. It was used for approximately 4 years, and then it was closed when they built the new hospital. Now, what happened is in 1948, it was Greensboro's turn, or Guilford County's turn, to have an epidemic. And it started, what happened is polio would show up as soon as the weather turned warm. So beginning in April or May, the medical community noticed this upswing of polio cases being reported. And it was obvious that we were in the midst of an epidemic. Well, the number of cases they were incurring overwhelmed this facility. They couldn't handle it. So what the community did, or what the county did, is they opened up a second facility. And it was located on Green Street in the old News and Record building. The News and Record had moved out of their building into a new building, and this building was sitting there vacant. So they went in and quickly renovated it. And they opened it on July the 1st, 1948. Now, they knew that was a temporary fix. This building was in such bad shape that the Greensboro Fire Department kept a fire truck in their parking lot with a full crew, because this was a wooden building, and they were afraid that thing was going to catch fire, and they were going to have to get those kids out of that building. That's how bad it was. So what they did, they knew they had to do something permanent, so they ended up raising $350,000 in a matter of a few weeks, which was a huge sum of money back then. And they broke ground on the Central Carolina Convalescent Hospital on July the 9th, 48. They built that hospital in 95 days. They were working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. All the workmen were volunteers. All the tradespeople, plumbers, electricians, concrete people, masonry people. They all volunteered. In fact, they had food tents set up out there where the community was was feeding them on site. Now, of course, in addition to the tradesmen, there were a lot of other, quote, volunteers out there hauling brick and doing whatever else they needed to do. And it was a very simple building. It was a cinder block, one-story, flat-roofed, concrete slab building. That's the front of it. I don't remember much about the hospital. I remember my ward, but I do remember the front of that building, because when I came back for outpatient treatments, that was the door we went through. Now, this was a 23,000 square foot hospital. It would house 139 inpatient polio victims. This is a picture, an aerial view of it. Now, believe it or not, I was out there the other day visiting with a professor over at UNCG whose students did a research project on the hospital. But that gas station right there is still there. Now, the only part of the hospital that's still out there is this part down here on this corner. Everything else is gone. These were the patient wings, these long wings here. You notice all the windows. See, there was no air conditioning in that hospital. What they had to do, they had to have a lot of windows to keep the air circulating through the building. Let me tell you, in the summertime, it got hot. But those were the wings where the patients were located. That's the front of the building that I just showed you a picture of. And this is was the reception area and the outpatient clinic. One of the problems is there are a lot of people with polio that have been stricken by polio who didn't need to be hospitalized, but they did need physical therapy. So what happened was they taught the parents what to do at home, and then they would bring them in here, and they would work on them further on an outpatient basis. Now, this is a picture. What we had was they segregated you by when you were admitted to the hospital. They took the most serious cases of polio. When they took them, they put you on a ward based upon your age and sex. So I was on a boys' ward, ranging in age from probably 3.5, 4.5, up to about 12, 13 years old. There were probably 25 of us. The girls' ward was across the hall. That's where they put my sister. I was hospitalized on July the 23rd. My parents took me out there. They were told that I was probably going to be there at least a year. They saw what the program was. It was extremely intensive. They decided, even though originally they were going to treat my sister on an outpatient basis, they were so impressed, they actually brought her out the next day, and they put her on the girls' ward. Now, this is what a ward looks like. Excuse me, I'm sorry. At the end of the wards, they had iron lung machines. Now, you'll notice this one has got an oxygen tent. Not all of them had that. There's a little girl in there. You can barely make it out. But back in the corner here, you can see some beds. Those were the beds on the ward. So at the end of each ward, they would have 2 or 3 iron lung machines. And if you were in the ward, those things were noisy. You heard me, and they never quit, obviously. Because if they quit, people couldn't breathe. But obviously, this young lady's got some serious breathing issues because they put up an oxygen tent around her. And this is what a ward looks like. This is a girls' ward. Notice that the beds line up the hall. It's like a military hospital. Between each window, they put a bed. And they were on both sides of the room, going to the length of those buildings. Now, 2 things that I got real tickled about in this picture. Number one, you'll notice that all the girls have hair. None of the boys had hair. They gave you a buzz cut. And number 2, look at that fancy bed. I can assure you, my bed looked nothing like that. All mine would do is had a crank at the end that would crank up the head a little bit. The reason they didn't, when I was in the hospital, they didn't crank your bed up. You were required to lie flat on your bed all the time. Now you'll notice, see, that bed allows you to lie flat but still be raised up. Because what they didn't want to do, they didn't want to put a strain on your hips or your back. Because your muscles have been injured, and they didn't want to put a strain on them, which would injure them further. So they basically kept you flat on the bed with no pillow. Notice there's no pillows. No pillow, because that puts a crick in your neck. No pillows, and you basically lay there all day long. And of course, they kept you pretty busy. And this is a picture, I believe, of a boys' ward. They blocked out the faces, so I can't confirm that. That's a picture of a boys' ward. Now, this is a picture of my sister and I. Periodically, they would bring my sister over from the girls' ward and put her in bed with me so we could visit. Because you didn't really have much contact with anybody. You were in your bed, and you only saw your parent, had any communication with your parents once a week. And that was on Sunday afternoon and visiting hours. So they would bring her over, and you'll notice she's holding my hand. This is basically the only contact with something other than a nurse or a nurse's aide that you had. So it was great to have my sister there, even though she didn't want to be there. But let me show you some things that are in this picture. The reason I think that none of she's up with you. But notice the straps going off the top of her little outfit here. That's a top that you put on. You know what they call that? It was called a restraint. And what they did, they used those ties. There was one off each shoulder. See, I've got one right there. And there were two off on each corner at the bottom. There's her two on that side. There are two more on the other side. I think those are it right there, coming up under her. They used those to tie you down to the bed. So you were tied to your bed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, on your back. You're not allowed to get up. You're not allowed to sit up. You're not allowed to stand up. And they didn't, and of course, now you tell a 5-year-old, don't get up. Good luck with that. So the only thing they could do was restrain you. And that's how they did it. So you had two pieces of clothing. You had your restraint, which was this top. Notice how mine's white, hers is gray. And these little loincloths, that was your underwear. They had little ties on the sides so they could get them off and on very easily. And that was it. You didn't have any of your own clothes. You were not allowed to have toys. No toys in the bed. Because they couldn't keep track of the toys. They had no place to put them in the hospital. Now, this is a picture of my sister and I. And the reason I'm showing you two pictures, I thought you would think one would be enough. I wanted you to see these. Guess what those are? Those were called foot boxes. Now, if you're laying flat on your back in the bed, what happens to your feet? They flop over. Well, that twists your knee and it twists your hip. So what they had these little boxes built. I love the holes. I think that was for ventilation. I'm not quite sure. They put your feet in these boxes, which kept your feet pointed toward the ceiling. And you were required to keep your feet in there. Now you'll notice in the back of it, it's got something back there. That was a sandbag. And I kept it weighted down so it wouldn't move. Now, if they use that kind of thing today, that would be a $25,000 piece of medical equipment. Wherever you went, your foot box went with you. When I went home for Christmas, the only time I left that hospital was to go home for Christmas for 2 days. They sent my foot box with me. Now, let me talk a little bit about polio. In 1948, when we had the epidemic, the county knew it was in trouble, and they took extraordinary action. They closed all the schools, closed the daycares, the pools, the parks. Children were not allowed to go to the movies. You were instructed to keep your child not only at home, but to keep them in the house. They didn't even want them in the yard, because they thought at that point in time that polio was spread by mosquitoes and flies, because it always showed up when the weather turned warm. Now, it was a good thing they kept you inside, because they were spraying DDT all over the county, if you can imagine. So, it was a very frightening time. Now, what they had in 1948, we had 249 cases of paralytic polio. Now, that doesn't sound like much of an epidemic, does it? Now, of course, 12 patients or 12 children died that summer. But the problem was that 75% of the people that were stricken with polio didn't know they had it. No outward symptoms at all, but yet they were still infectious. 25% of the people that came down with polio had flu-like symptoms, nausea, diarrhea, headache, fever, achiness, fatigue. And that would last 2 or 3 weeks. Now, 1% of that 25% would go to sleep at night. Mom would tuck them in. When they woke up in the morning, they would have some sort of visual or noticeable weakness or paralysis somewhere in their neuromuscular system. Arms, leg, back, shoulders, lungs, can't swallow. Anything that's controlled by muscles could have been affected. Some were minor, some were quite severe. Of that 1%, 2 to 10%, the lungs would be involved. Those were the children who were in serious trouble. Those were the children who ended up in the iron lung machines. And if your parents didn't get to you because you couldn't breathe, if they couldn't get to you in time, it was a terrible ending. So it was a terrible, terrible disease. Now, even though 249 paralytic polio patients doesn't sound like much, if you do the math, that's the 1%. That meant in Guilford County in 1948, over 6,200 children were showing signs of polio. Now, Guilford County wasn't very large in 1948. It's probably a fourth or 20% of what it is now, 100,000 people. So that is a lot of children who were sick, whose parents were having to deal knowing that it was polio. And everybody knew what the symptoms were. Is that what you didn't know is every time you put your child in bed at night, you didn't know what was going to greet you in the morning. Can you imagine the horror of that? And this would go on for 3 weeks. Now, let me talk about what they did to you in the hospital. That's obviously a picture of Dell and I. Your routine in the hospital, once they admitted to you based on sex and age. And notice I didn't say anything about race. In 1948, or in the 50s, when I was admitted in 1953, everything was segregated. But they did not segregate the children by race in the hospital. They did at the other hospitals, but not at the polio hospital. The colored children or black children were put in the same wards as the white children. And believe it or not, that raised a lot of eyebrows. That just wasn't done in 1953. But the governor's daughter was a patient over on my sister's side of the ward. And he's apparently sent an aide down there to ask about it, because he had noticed it. And the aide was told in no uncertain terms, we don't have the space, we don't have the staff, we're doing what we have to do to treat them. If you want to go to a separate hospital, that's fine. We'll be happy to try to get it manned up for you. We're going to do what we need to do. So the polio hospital here in Greensboro was probably the first integrated, publicly owned facility in the state. Little piece of history. Now, the daily schedule. They would get you up in the morning, early. They would help you. You never got out of that restraint. You were flat on your back, and you stayed that way. You would brush your teeth using a little spit pan. They would give you a urinal and a bedpan to do your business, and then they feed you lunch or feed you breakfast. When you first got there, they did not allow you to feed yourself. They fed you. It wasn't until they had fitted you for a back restraint, we'll talk about the corset or back restraint a little later. But once they fitted you with a back restraint, then they would allow you to sit up to eat, and then they made you lie back down again. Now, once you finished your breakfast, a physical therapist would show up, and she would start in on you. They would work on me for an hour and a half because they had a lot of things to work on, anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. And it was pretty intense. When the physical therapist was done, 2 nurses' aides would show up. And they had these army blankets that had been superheated. And they would proceed, they would take your top off. The only time you ever came out of that darn thing. They would take your top off, and they would roll you on your side and slide this blanket, hot blanket up under you, and proceed to swallow you in it. So basically, you were like a mummy. You couldn't move both your arms and all your legs. The only thing that you could see was from here up. And they left you in that blanket for about an hour. And then when they took it off, you were nice and pink, and you were wet from head to toe. And then they would clean you up and put your top back on and tie you back down to the bed. And about that time, lunch arrived. In the afternoon, the process started over again. The physical therapist showed up, the blankets showed up. By that time, it was time for dinner, and you went to bed early. And that was your routine. That went on 6 days a week. It never varied, except for one thing. Now, if they were not able to rehab you, by the way, what they then did was they fitted you out there with system devices. There's a little girl that's being taught to walk with leg braces. Apparently, they could not rehabilitate her leg. If the damage was so bad, polio didn't damage the motor neurons, it destroyed them, then there's nothing to rehab. They can't fix it. But if the motor neuron was only damaged, they had great success in reviving the motor neuron and getting it back to the point where they could get that muscle back to a normal usage. If they couldn't, then they had to fit you with some sort of assistive devices. Here they had both legs, and apparently they had fitted her for leg braces and are teaching her to use them. When I came out of the polio hospital, I had a leg brace on my left leg. They were not able to rehab my left leg. So I actually went to that part of the building where they were teaching you to walk and use crutches and so forth. It was near the end of my stay at the hospital. Now, the only change in the routine was instead of the blankets, sometimes they would take you to the hot tub. Now that sounds great. Go in the hot tub. No, it's not that great, trust me. They put you on this legless cot. First they pick you up, put you on a gurney, and wheel you down the hall. You had no idea where, when I first did it, I had no idea where I was going. They took me down there and they put me on this thing. And you can't see it, but up in the right-hand corner, there's a boom arm. They came over and grabbed that cot, lifted it up, put it over the tub, and lowered you into it. And the water was very, very high. Now, of course, you know, the first time they took me down there, here I am. Both legs are paralyzed. Both arms are extremely weak. My shoulders are weak. I cannot swim. And they're getting ready to lower me into this huge tank of water. And my brain is telling me what? You're going to drown. They're going to kill you. Well, that lasted only until my skin touched the water. And my brain said, no, they're not going to drown you, they're going to cook you. But that water was hot. It was hotter than a hot tub, and I've been in a lot of hot tubs. But it was hot. They actually had to pour cold water in it to cool it down so I could tolerate it. They put you in there for an hour. You came out, you were red as a beet. They dried you off, put your clothes back on you, and sent you back to your room. Trust me, I have great empathy for lobsters now. That thing was brutal. It was no fun at all. Now you'll notice over in the corner, I got a big kick out of this. You'll notice over there in the corner, you see over there? Those are dry loincloths that they would take your, they would actually, see, he's got his loincloth on, see that? Now I want you to notice his arm. Notice anything unusual about it? Notice how she's handling it? Obviously, that arm has suffered some muscle atrophy from polio. You know the phrase, you use it or lose it? That was very true back then. But they were, one of the things they did to you, they were constantly moving your limbs, trying to be sure that those muscles didn't atrophy from lack of use. Because if your brain can't communicate with your muscles, what are the muscles going to do? They're just going to sit there. So what they do, they atrophy. So she is preventing him from damaging his arm. I'm suspecting what she's doing is moving his hand over here so he can grab a hold of that rail just like he has over here. But I can tell you, when I was in that thing, I was holding on for dear life, both hands. He obviously needs some help. And notice how skinny his arm is. He's experienced obviously some atrophy.
Bill, can I jump in right here?
Absolutely.
We may have one or two more pictures that we'd love to see, and as hours draw to a close, I wanted to see if we could maybe take a couple questions.
I'll be happy to answer questions either now or at the very end. I'll be hanging around if anybody has any questions. But when I was discharged from the hospital, I was there for 10 months. They were not able to fix my left leg. They tried everything. They do massages on my left leg. That sounds, oh, that's great. Massages, no. They did deep muscle massages. By the time they were through with me, I was in tears. That was awful. They were not able to recover my left leg. So when I was, even though they were sending me home, when I was sitting in a chair, my feet were flat on the ground. I could not lift my left foot off the ground. I could not straighten my left leg. If I stood up, I could not move my left leg forward. I had no muscle in my hip. So I couldn't step forward with my left leg. To walk, I had to start with my right leg and swing my left leg forward. Now, what's interesting is that was the front of the leg. The bottom part of my leg was fine. My feet, ankles, lower thigh, whatever it's called, were fine. Just the upper thigh and hip. If I was standing up, I could lift my leg backwards into the air. I could also bend my leg backwards and kick myself in the bottom. So the muscles on the back side of my leg recovered. The muscles on the front part of my leg did not. Have not. Now when they sent me home, they told my mother and daddy that he's going to be an assistive device probably for the rest of his life. Well, they didn't know my mother. She was a force of nature. In fact, Cooper confirmed that. He knew her. She told him under no uncertain terms, no, he's coming out of that leg brace. He's coming. Now, also sent me home in a corset. I'll show you a picture of a corset in a minute. Sent me home in a corset for my back. He's coming out of both of those, even if it kills him. So she took me home, and my physical therapy continued for the next 2.5 years. Once or twice a day, every day, 7 days a week. She had me up before school doing physical therapy on my left leg on the dining room table. And then she would put hot pads on my leg. And in the summer, I went to the pool, and she made us do kickboards up and down the pool early in the morning, physical therapy. So it continued. They finally agreed, the physical therapist finally agreed to let me get rid of the leg brace and the back brace when I was in the 3rd grade. I entered the 1st grade and 2nd grade in both a leg brace, crutches, and a back brace. Now, it was wonderful to get out of that corset. Let me show you a picture of the corset. It was a wonderful device.
Bill, we're going to need to wrap up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, well, I get kind of wrapped.
Well, no, this is a story that it touches our entire community, and if you weren't struck with the virus, it's something that you probably knew someone who was.